Unicon. Just threw this slide up to just sort of briefly talk about the various services we provide. uPortal Sakai has essentially most anything that you deal with here in Apereo, we provide support for. We're essentially a services company and generally look to partner with our clients on various projects. About me, just briefly, I'm a software architect with Unicon. I would say the primary thing I tend to spend time on in the community is Sakai, though I'm getting involved more and more in the learning analytics space as much as I can, much as these guys will tolerate me. And I also work out of Charlotte, North Carolina, so I'm East Coaster.
And
hello everyone, my name is Sandeep Jayaprakash. I work as a learning analytics specialist at Marist. I was also one of the technical teams for the OAAI algorithm system which we developed. So my background is in data mining and Mediumterm analytics, and a little bit of software engineering as well.
And just really briefly, I'm also going to say I'm somewhat standing in for Alan Berg, for those of you who know him. He can't be at this conference, but I'll attempt to represent as much as I can UBA's, or University of Amsterdam's involvement in the analytics initiative.
serving as chair.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. He's the lead coordinator, I guess, for the grant.
Now, O's is big.
That's right.
So a quick rundown of what we're going to try to cover. This is going to be a bit of a lightning round in a sense. We're going to try to cover a lot at a high level. There are a number of learning analytics sessions that are taking place throughout the conference. And so much of that, everything we cover here, you can go to sessions and drill down and go into a lot more detail. So I'll start by talking a little bit about kind of what is learning analytics and why is it maybe kind of important. I'm guessing some of you probably have some of that shown up here, but make sure we're on the same page. We'll cover that briefly. Talk a little bit about the Apereo Learning Analytics initiative, which launched a little earlier this year, so it's a new initiative. And then I'll turn it over to folks and Sandeep to go through and talk about where things are right now, the status of some of the ongoing projects. And we'll wrap up by talking about kind of where things are going and how to get involved. And hopefully we'll have enough time for Q&A. The other thing there is that there's a FOF, a learning analytics BOF that's going to take place this afternoon, I think 3 or 3:15 in that time slot.
3:15.
And we're planning to have a much more open meeting, discussion, dialogue about getting more involved in the initiative and things of that nature. I will note and apologize up front, I had a scheduling conflicts that need to be at the Apereo Foundation general meeting as well. So I'll be a little late to the Bird of Affairs session, but I have great confidence in my colleagues will probably assign me a lot of work. So I'm not there.
A lot of volunteer.
So what is learning analytics? So I like to use this slide because this is a really new and emerging field. Terminology has shifted and changed just in the last couple of years. And so I think when we got started in this kind of area of work, we referred to it, I think a lot of people refer to it as generally academic analytics. More recently, this term learning analytics has emerged. So I'd like to kind of draw a little bit of a distinction between the two. And these are debated, and you can go read a lot of stuff on EDUCAUSE about different terms if you want. But in general, I consider academic analytics to be a bit more focused on the business side of running colleges and universities. And so they tend to support operational and financial decision making, tend to be a little bit more for managing executives, deans, vice provosts, so forth to use. And just as one example, it's not meant to kind of point out one that's better than the other, but I think University of Michigan has done a lot of work in this space, creating these business intelligence tools for their academic leadership to make informed decisions about enrollment projections, budgets, and things of that nature. On the learning analytics side, I think the focus is a lot more about optimizing learning using analytics and big data. And I think it's more focused on students and instructors in terms of audience and focused on learning behavior. And as one example in more of the commercial space, and I use this because I think it's one that people are pretty familiar with, is Course Signals that originally came out of Purdue University. It will be, and so it's an academic early alert system that predicts when students are at risk of not completing the course, and then allows messaging from the instructor to help intervene with that student. And when we talk about some of the work that's going on, you'll hear that much of the work that we've done in the Open Academic Analytics Initiative has been around, in a sense, creating an open source version of our core signals, an open source academic early alert system. And that's the last point here, is that we called it the Open Academic Analytics Initiative because it was looking for this term learning analytics came on the scene, but we probably, today I would have called it the Open Learning Analytics. So what's all the hype about? Why is this so important? And I will say, I think there is a lot of hype around learning analytics. At the same time, I think it holds tremendous potential to improve education in a range of ways. Personally, the reason I think it's such a powerful field that's emerging right now, it has this ability or potential at least to break what's sometimes referred to as the higher education iron triangle. And that's a concept that actually came out of the healthcare industry in the university. But the idea is that a lot of change in higher education is confined to this iron triangle of cost, quality, and access. The idea being that if you try to improve one, you end up causing problems with the other. So we might be able to come up with ways of greatly improving the quality of instruction by assigning a tutor to every single student at Marist College. I guarantee you that would improve the quality of their education. It would also make us bankrupt because the cost of doing that would be way too high. So that's the challenge, is how do you affect design, trying to break it in the sense of being able to do things like improve quality, like reducing costs and increasing access to education. A couple of examples here, like academic early alert systems, I think have the potential of doing that in terms of improving quality and access, not increasing costs. I'm also very interested in adaptive learning systems, which I categorize in this area of learning analytics as well. These are cognitive tutoring systems, and personally, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to get better at teaching core basic subject matter, like, let's say, algebra, than human beings are. You're endlessly patient, they can work with students, identify where they're misunderstanding something, help them through those misunderstandings and so forth. Another example of something that I yes, about 5 minutes ago. Thought you were raising your hands here, right? I'm definitely not here to answer your question. So there's also challenges with this. Excuse me. So learning analytics is certainly not a panacea. Huge issues around privacy and ethics. Lots of issues around creating silos of learning analytics tools. You've probably seen things like Blackboard analytics pop up. There's analytic systems and library systems. There's analytic tools in ERPs today. I think if we end up in a world where you have 1,000 analytics tools all across the different systems, I don't know if that's really going to realize the potential of this technology. Well, these guys will talk a bit about how we might resolve that in the future. And there hasn't been a lot of coordination across the landscape either. So one of the things that happened over this past year for launching the Apereo Learning Analytics Initiative, I'll say that although we have kind of a mission here and a statement about what we're doing, it's probably also open for some definition of what the mission of this group is going to be longer term. But we really want to try to operationalize and accelerate learning analytics software and frameworks. It says operationalizing some of the stuff coming out of standards bodies, research groups like Solar, and actually producing software based on that. And also trying to make sure we're coordinating so we're not duplicating effort. So I think you can point to a couple of cases of that already. I think this is my last slide. Not late. But basically, one of the ways we're approaching that is trying to build a closer partnership and collaboration with Society for Learning Analytics and Research. Not familiar with them. They are rigorous academic research society. So these are faculty members of institutes around the world engaged in pretty rigorous research in learning analytics. Marist, I mentioned, is a founding partner. And now we're starting to partner with them to look at how we can operationalize some of the ideas that we have in the research area and actually software. And a couple of things that we've done to start moving in that direction. We did an Open Learning Analytics Summit that was kind of co-facilitated by myself and George Siemens, who's the current president and a big name in the learning analytics research space. Cindy and Aaron and others have been working to take this social, well, not going to acronym, it's the SNAP tool for data visualization around discussion forums and integrate that into Sakai. SNAP is a tool that we're looking at some work from the Solar folks. We're looking at maybe pursuing some grant funding with Solar, some joint grant funding opportunities. And the last, which you all get to see on Wednesday morning, George will be here to give a keynote talking about openness, the importance of openness in analytics. And
I'm going to take that one.
Okay.
Plus 0.5.
That's right. And, yeah, I'll take over a little bit. That's fine. So, what else is the Learning Analytics Initiative about? Essentially, we're trying to be a group that helps you, and by you we mean institutions, get involved in learning analytics without just sort of trying to jump in on your own. I think in the office afternoons, I'm going to ask a few folks who I've talked to who have either started efforts around learning analytics and not finished them, or have started them and had mixed success. You know, I'm going to ask them to tell some of their stories as much as they can do that, because I think the idea is that this is a really, really new area, and you can't just sort of jump in and hope everything works out. So ideally, with the community, you can actually learn from what everybody else has done. You can try to build on what other people have done, not just hope that whatever random direction you chose is the right one. So the safety net piece of that. And then it's also a place where hopefully people can come together from different organizations. Talk about that. The other thing, and this is more specifically like what are we trying to do today, we're trying to start building this minimum stack, as we call it, essentially learning analytics diamond, which I have this is an easy way for us to kind of refer to the concepts that we're talking about. And then try to get other people involved by saying, hey, we're doing some stuff, come look at it. You need some of the researchers and the people that are thinking about this stuff but haven't really been starting to build it yet. We're trying to get them engaged with the folks who are trying to build this stuff, like Sandeep and I and others who are actually trying to build functional systems. Get the researchers involved in that piece so that we aren't just sort of only dealing with practical or only dealing with research, but sort of bringing those two together. Share knowledge, so instead of doing these things on our own and our own campuses and not talking about what else is going on, we're sharing it out with everybody else. Hopefully build into something very good. And then of course community outreach, like this kind of stuff where we're trying to tell you guys, hey, come get involved. Which, you know, not to like put too fine a point on it, but part of this talk is to say, we don't want to be the only people giving this talk next year. We want some of you to be up here giving this talk with us next year, right? Or maybe even you're leading it next year. That'd be cool too. I didn't do what I meant it to do. Like technical movement. There we go. So this is Learning Analytics Diamond. It's just meant to be a way to represent the different areas and different concepts that we're talking about when we talk about learning analytics. So I won't spend really any serious time on this, but just to say there are 5 core aspects that we're talking about. Collection is essentially the idea of how we gather data about what students are doing. The storage is where do you then put that data, right? So that you can then do something with it later. The analysis piece would be the various models, the processing, the turning it into something that's actually useful, turning it from giant scores of data into something that someone can look at and understand. And then the action and communication pieces, so the action piece might be a system which works with that data. So the easiest example that I'll give, and then the communication piece is how do we disseminate it back out to your users, not to administrators per se, but out to the end users, the students and teachers. So the easiest example I have is starting with collection. Perhaps that would be your Sakai LMS that's sending data out using a standard like Experience API to send it to a learning record store, something like a Learning Locker or a Rust-SC Swarm Cloud, which then you pull the data from that Swarm Cloud system and your SIS, run it through Marist OAAI model in an automated fashion, and get to results that say you have these students that are at risk on different levels. You take that data, feed it into a system like SSP, which then helps you remediate that problem, work with those students, and get them up to no longer failing and actually achieving, and then that feeds back into the LMS. So it's kind of a complete cycle. So that's just one example. Ideally, you'd be swapping pieces in and out in all different areas. Different models, different systems that take action based on those models, perhaps different record stores, multiple record stores for different types of data. Obviously, collection can come from many different systems, so we'll talk about that. All right, so where are things right now? So these are the systems that are already in place today. Using the same diagram, It's not quite as colored in, and that was intentional to indicate the parts that showed there is a fair bit of work to be done. Right now we do have collection in a few different places. So Sakai, for example, pushing data out using the Experience API, and OAAI pushing data out using the Experience API. That's there. That's today. The storage systems that are available right now, really, there's only one decent open source alternative. That's Learning Locker, and they really just released about a week ago. 2 weeks ago, but also UVA is building one, and I'm going to get into some of that stuff later. But my point with this slide is really just to say that right now today, there's not a lot of open source options out there. I mean, there are a lot of commercial options in these spaces. And let me close out that loop by also saying SSP is there today, but there's no automatic connection between any of this stuff and SSP. But ideally, eventually, we want some APIs where the data just feeds from one system to the next. There might be some human interaction, obviously, in that, but it wouldn't be someone having to copy and paste from one place to another. Checking some boxes and saying, yes, let this data go through as well. So we do have some systems out there, some open source systems that fill in some of these areas, but there's a fair bit of work to be done. Okay, so let me talk about some of the systems that exist right now. Learning Locker is an LRS, and it just was released about a week ago. It is open source. It's out there to take a look at on GitHub. We're going to be demoing that one specifically at the demo, the showcase night, I'm sorry. And certainly, if you have any questions about it, you can always find me. There is Sakai Experience API integration that I mentioned. That's something that University of Amsterdam helped develop, or paid for, essentially, Unicon developed last year. So we partnered together to get this working. They're actually using it already to collect data from their systems. And it's something that we're hoping that more people will be able to use this. It is part of Sakai 10, so it's built in. It's just a matter of doing a little bit of configuration, and your system will start sending Experience API compatible statements to wherever you want to store it. Like I said, we'll demo that on the showcase night as well. There's the OAAI Experience API integration. Again, that was also University of Amsterdam working with the OAAI community to help get that built. It's the same thing as Sakai, but we didn't have a picture. same kind of idea though, and the point really is that multiple systems can be sending activity events about your students. And I'm not going to go into real detail about what Experience API is. That's more technical than we have time for in this talk. But I'm going to keep plugging our other talks. So we have technical talk tomorrow. You can come to that and find out about it. We also have the showcase night, the analytics corner at the showcase night, where you can just come and ask us any questions you want. We'll be happy to give you many spiels about the different pieces. There's also the OAAI Early Alert System, which I'm sure a lot of you probably already heard about, but just the short version is that we collect a bunch of data, we run it through a series of models, 3 models, I believe, and then at the end you get out a series of at-risk students, and the data includes demographics, from SIS data, things like SAT scores, and then some LMS data. So the idea is that the LMS data could come from something like the Experience API, from your learning record store, and the SIS data hopefully could come through something like LIS, though LIS, as it exists right now, does not really fit that exactly, but hopefully as we move forward and as these systems mature, some of the specifications also mature. And then I think the last one that is, and this is stuff that's, again, what's working right now today, is Snap. And Sandy will be doing a demo of that let's talk about that on Wednesday, give you more detail about it. But the short version is this: using data from Sakai's forum, you can generate kind of cool little network graphs, and it's probably pretty hard to see what's up there. But the idea is you can see graphs of how students are interacting. And like I said, we'll demo that at the showcase night, and then Sandy has a whole talk on Wednesday. Oh, and there is one more, lest I forget it. Student Success Plan, which also, of course, exists today and is being used, I think, I want to say at least a dozen. Is it more than that? Close to 20 institutions using SSP right now. The idea, again, is that it's essentially a system where you can have people go through a path to go from, I'm an at-risk student, I'm having trouble and failing, go through a path, a series of steps to get to a point where they are working with the right person, talking to the right person, and eventually, hopefully, getting to success. That's the idea. And I think Russ has do you have a talk on it, or just to showcase?
Tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, so I talk tomorrow about SSP if you're interested in learning more about that. All right, so what projects are in progress? So that stuff I just talked about, that's all available, done, working today. But those pieces right now don't communicate all that much. So we really want to get to a point where we've got more full communication. So what are we working on? What are the things that we are actively engaged in at the moment? The first easy one is uPortal Experience API integration. So we've got it for Sakai, we've got it for OAE, Apereo OAE. So the next one coming down the line, which is in progress, is uPortal. Again, this is University of Amsterdam. So just pointing out they're strong contributors. Unfortunately, Alan couldn't be here, but he would have a lot of interesting things to say, I'm sure. But essentially, the idea here is that events coming out of uPortal will then go into the Experience API. So we're reporting what your students are doing in your portals, not just in the learning system. And that's one of the key things, one of the key points I want to make here, is that data about what students are doing doesn't have to come from a learning system. It, in fact, should come from a system. So if you're using things like Drupal, if you're using things like something that's not CMS and not Portal and not library system. No, library system. Yeah, there you go. That's a good example. Library systems or anything else, right? These things can be adjusted to produce these events relatively easily. I mean, these projects are usually just a few weeks long. They don't take, it doesn't take months to make a system produce events that go into an LRS. It just takes weeks worth of effort. So it's a relatively short effort to produce these types of system integrations. So that's in progress. The UVA LRS, which I think will eventually have a name, but it's still in process. So maybe when they release it, it'll have a name. This will be an open source thin LRS, and by thin LRS, Alan wanted me to mention essentially what that means. So we'll support the specification, but it won't have fancy features like a user, fancy user interfaces or reporting or anything like that. It just will be a data collection system, API driven. And there are reasons for doing that at University of Amsterdam, which I usually refer to as UVA, because I don't have to say that long name, is lower security profile, because the entrance points are really just the APIs, there aren't interfaces or anything like that, so low security attack profile. And then less code, so it's easier to optimize performance, not a lot of code around interfaces and whatnot. Their goal, instead of building a lot of interfaces around their repository, their storage repository, is instead to build a separate dashboard. Now that's a longer term goal. That's not even in process yet. But it is something they're working on. So the idea is that rather than having a fully featured LRS, which Learning Locker is a little bit more fully featured, instead you have a very thin LRS, which is high performance, very small amounts of code, very easy to run, but there isn't much fluff to it. You would not point your faculty at it, because there would be nothing for this. So the release for that is, I was told, soon, which probably means a few weeks, but it is in process, and they're fairly well along. They've already done a bit of testing, and I'm helping them test, and a few others in the community are. Okay, the other thing that is in process, Marist and Unicon are working together to essentially build an automation for OAAI. So right now, OAAI is a very manual process. We have to pull data out of Sakai using scripts. You have to then pull data from SIS, which that part won't maybe be automated anytime soon, but then you have to run it through a desktop application, which requires Windows and Microsoft SQL Server and things like that. And so we're going to repackage this into a web application, a simple web application. We're going to build a piece in Sakai so that the data can come out of Sakai without you having to go there and run stuff on, run SQL and take that data and somehow convert it. And turn it into a process where you can have this thing just running automatically. You wouldn't have to get it developed. You would just process daily, hourly, however often you wanted to run it. And the goal here is to essentially build a framework that, in the very short term, will just automate the work that Marist has done, but in the longer term, could eventually have other models plugged into it and essentially serve as a framework for running analytics in an automated fashion, totally open source. That's the goal of that. And there will also be an LTI piece to sort of send information back about what was done back to Sakai through an LTI. So it's a pretty cool project. I think we're thinking 3 or 4 months roughly is our time frame. That's right. End of June. Right. Well, we think it'll be sometime this year that we'll have something really cool. All right, so I'm going to let my esteemed colleague take over.
Okay, where things are going. Basically, in the earlier slides, Aaron showed that we have two components which are completely communicating with each other. There are other components which are kind of disconnected at this point. So we want to complete this analytics diamond by having each of the systems within Apereo communicating with each other and close this particular learning analytics cycle. Once we do this, we'll be able to test the rationale, test the awareness as to where are the gaps in terms of bringing in additional capabilities in terms of analytical solutions and stuff like that. A few low-hanging fruits, Aaron briefly touched upon those. One is the OAAI automation. At this point, it's fairly related to earlier systems. But we can incrementally increase the capabilities to do more like content analysis or social network analysis, where we are trying to assess the quality of submissions and whatnot. So what we envision is more like an app store model going forward, where you have a slew of analytical solutions available, and they're going ahead and picking up data from the LRS in a particular fashion that is inclusive of that particular tool, and they just go ahead and deliver like quality insights to SSP or related systems in terms of having like quality interventions and engagements. And like I mentioned, SSP, that's another area which we want to focus on in terms of providing more automated algorithms which can support in terms of identifying what the students at risk or finding the success rate of each of the intervention plans that are already in place. Once they start generating a lot of data, once we complete the cycle, then that can be fed once again into the analysis to enrich it even further. Then we are also planning for LDI version of Snap. Snap is one of the tools, social network analysis pedagogical practices. That's what it stands for. It's one of the tools that was developed by folks in Australia. They're basically it's a product out of the solar community, the research community, and we thought it would make a good project at bridging both Apereo and solar initiatives and completing this particular LTI capability will help this tool to be deployed in a wide range of settings. And then we also envision on a prototype level, as an immediate prototype level, come up something in terms of early weather dashboard where we are delivering insights from OAAI and SSP in a more intuitive fashion, or depending on what stakeholders the dashboard can have at a student perspective or faculty perspective, where each of them are getting like related analytical insights delivered. A few long-term opportunities. We are working closely with Solar, as I mentioned. We are looking for other avenues where we can identify more gaps and more requirements and come up with more proposals that we can go hunting together. Where we are tapping into Solar's research arm, and Apereo is providing more technical arm in terms of and OpenLRS and real-time analytics that is coming up. UVA is still in the process of completing more logistics related to that, and that is something we can see sometime next year. And generic dashboard, moving beyond the earlier dashboard, what we envisioned before, like widget-based model, which can be widely applied on any kind of analytical solutions or insights you want to deliver to respective stakeholders. You can also have like a management perspective as well. So there's a multi-dimensional thing that we can tackle on multiple fronts. And we want to also come up with a simple and easy way to configure the learning analytics diamond package that the architecture that we showed earlier, so it can be deployed easily in any of the settings with minimal supervision. And App Store model for analytical tools basically have more capabilities in terms of whatever insights you want to get out of the data. And we are also looking in terms of more reference implementations because whenever we are going in terms of hunting brands and everything, it's always good to have a rationale what works and what doesn't. And just definitely helps us test the models. That is what we're doing earlier in the program. And we are also looking into how do we open up the data, how do we open up the data in the community so that more researchers can come on board, test the solutions. For example, Marist came up with the early alert system. How do we test it out in a different setting and see like what kind of results we get? So those kind of cross-validation opportunities will be possible to look at. And if you have any particular ideas which fit the bill, or if you see any particular gaps that that you can come up with in this particular architecture, then we definitely need more inputs from the community as well, so that we can incrementally improve it and take it forward. This is more details as to how to get involved, some links. These are a series of presentations Aaron already mentioned. There is a bar session which is going to be at 3:15 today. We can get a little more in detail as to each of the initiatives or any of the questions you might have, or any of the other projects that we have started on in terms of bringing it into our knowledge and taking forward. And yeah, the learning analytics technologies and snap demonstrations and a presentation to the or you can also come and talk to us at any point. These are some of the links that would be useful in terms of Apereo Learning Analytics initiative. What I'm going to do is at the end of the presentation, I'll share this one lanyard. So it's available for you, and you can always come back to those questions. Oh, and one last question.
Sure. So, Marist was selected this year through a kind of proposal process to host the 2015 Learning Analytics Knowledge Conference. This is the main international conference of the Solar Group. So it's generally been a really kind of academic research, rigorous peer review kind of conference. But as part of our winning of the bid, we're going to open it up and create an additional practitioners track, which Alan Berg is going to help co-chair that track. And so we're really trying to, again, use this conference to bridge and get more collaboration between solar researchers, and we're on the software development practitioner side. And so although I put this out here really to keep me, to make sure we did it, because now that I announced it, it's going to be hard to take back. But we would like to do a pre-conference hackathon between Apereo and solar folks. So you can imagine something like that Snap tool could come out of something like that, or at least a proof of concept where a bunch of researchers might toss out some interesting new ideas from a research perspective, and then we would take a day or two in a hackathon to see what we could do. We're also going to do an executive leadership summit. This is going to be for provosts and CIOs, maybe college presidents. Learning analytics, I think, has gotten so much attention. There's a lot of hype and confusion. And in order for institutional leaders to really make informed decisions about investing in learning analytics, we want to have kind of a strategic discussion about the role analytics is playing in higher education. So March 16th to the 20th, 2015, Marist College, and there's a website there. We're going to be putting a lot more information up over the summer about calls for papers and things of that nature. We have 30 seconds for discussion. Yeah, and also I think that we probably transition.
We have like about 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions, comments, thoughts, or actually, especially if anybody's doing some work in this space and you haven't had a chance to engage with one of us, we'd love to hear about that too.
So we've tossed out a good number of acronyms and things. Again, we have lots of stuff good. So if you're just confused by something and want some clarification.
What about integration with ePortfolio?
Question was about integration with ePortfolio systems.
I guess I want to talk on the technical level, but I've been extremely interested in mining data from electronic portfolios for learning analytics purposes. Really interesting data set that you don't find in a lot of other more traditional ed tech kind of tools. At the Learning Analytics conference this year, I saw the first time I'd ever seen that being done. I don't remember where that was. I'm sorry? Yes, yeah, thank you. So that's the first time I've ever seen anybody doing that, but I think it would be a great idea. I think you guys see that.
So when we did the stuff for UBA to build it into Sakai, the ePortfolio events, some of those events do actually trigger into XAPI events as well. It's not complete.
It's not sustainable. If you listen to all the arguments from ePortfolios, sold. The idea was that this was going to provide a cross-course way of getting students to practical learning. And in some sense, if you're trying to get students to do the right thing, to learn well, in some sense, ePortfolios and assessment is the student fields of learning analytics are the same thing. And I think it would be interesting if people still do portfolios. How do you find a way to integrate the student view of analytics into the portfolios?
Yeah, that's a good comment. I mean, we haven't talked to, say, the Karuta team, for example. Right, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense that maybe there would be events coming out of Karuta and then data that could feed back into Karuta, sort of as part of that diamond we talked about, where you would take those events, store them, process them, and send some information back to the portfolio itself, or perhaps to the people who are working with the students on their portfolio.
I also know that Choji at University of Kyoto is involved in Korea. It's also produces learning analytics, and a lot of it's from Japan as well. But I also think there's great potential to take the experience API and use it to feed into the portfolio. So lots of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
There's the
Question is, where's the Amsterdam code? Which I guess I should answer that. So it's the Sakai code is actually in Sakai 10. So it's there today. If you want to, you can just turn it on and point it at any LRS. Assuming you have an LRS running, you do need something that will absorb the data, right, somewhere for it to go. And like I said, we'll demo that at the showcase. The uPortal code is out in the community at the moment, but it's only half done. There's a uPortal. If you come to the tech talk, I'll actually talk about the ticket, so you can sort of follow that if you're just uPortal work. The OAE code is part of the current OAE release. I don't actually know what the number is. We don't have any OAE team here, but all of the code that Amsterdam has been doing related to Experience API, it's all out in the community. Now, you may also be asking, where is Amsterdam's LRS code? That code they have not released yet, but I'm told it will be 2 to 3 weeks. They just, people are a little bit shy sometimes when they want to make sure it's good before they put it out in front of people. But it is planned to be released open source, I believe, under Apache 2 license.
We'll tell Alan that there's lots of interest in it.
Yeah, he'll love to hear that.
So at NYU, I would say we're probably in kind of a pre-technology moment with learning analytics. Do you have any suggestions on how to sort of guide the conversation to get us to something that's a useful pilot or a useful take on metadata? Or how do we make progress from everything to something a little more focused?
Up to the learning analytics now.
As of 2015.
I mean, I will say that I think there's a huge amount of hype and vaporware. I mean, the number of vendors I've spoken to that actually, when you get down to it, it's like, oh, well, we actually haven't built that yet. But so I guess caution, and be careful about things. I would participate in this community and start getting more aware of what's happening. That's a very unhelpful answer, but I started going to the Learning Analytics Knowledge Conference 3 or 4 years ago. It's not a place where we're going to get deep technical knowledge, but it certainly helped me understand what was happening on the research side and why this technology was so interesting and had so much hype. It also helped me ground in the reality of, okay, actually most of the research is around a class of 25 students in it, not 50,000 students and that kind of thing. So that would be a place to jump.
Yeah, so I would say that one of the medium-term goals of the LAI community is to get to a point, and I'm going to say medium-term, I mean like a year to 2 years out, where we have a full stack for somebody who doesn't have on-site researchers and staff that can maintain all these different integrations themselves, and that they can just say, well, I have an LMS, or I have a system that will produce Experience API, or IMS caliber events, and that's all I have. How do I go from that to getting real actionable data out of that? We want to have a stack that will do that, the whole thing, but it's going to depend on essentially participation in the community. It will depend on funding, resources, and that kind of thing.
And I have that shape came from, so I could show my faculty just sort of what this thing is. I can't get out of my end just by putting any research. So I need something I can actually use.
So I forget what it was back in January. I think it was with SciNet. I did a webinar with the community on the Open Academic Analytics Initiative, and we showed how it was working and what kind of output faculty members get and things of that nature. And so that might be something for us to think about. Maybe we should do another webinar or something.
No, I think webinars can be used for something that works.
Right, and that's what.
Some kind of dashboard for students or something.
Right, and that's what we're building. It's going to be 3 or 4 months before we get to sort of, I think, prototypical stage. It may not be perfect, but it will be what you're talking about. It'll be something for people to look at. Russ.
So first of all, as director of the Student Success Plan project, I'd like to throw our support behind this, and we're really excited about both consuming data and also providing data for analytic knowledge. Secondly, the lady's point here in the front corner, it may be helpful to the community to even just set some common language. So as this goes forward, and I think as you talked about, there's just a lot of vaporware out there and a lot of hype, and everybody calls anything they can analytics. They put a report in their package, analytics, and I think there's a little bit of danger with cross-communication, and if we as a community could at least come to some common reference points as we work through these projects, I think that would be really helpful. And also help us inform people, like what's the difference between analytics and predictive analytics and reporting and data warehousing, et cetera. And I think we've got even some of that low-level fruit, and as you said, this is a free moment. And I think for many people, this is the first time they've ever forayed into this world. And it's a little bit of a mystery.
Yep. We're trying to figure out, I'm trying to figure out, I would say that we probably have 15 or 20 different efforts, all looking at the same questions. And there's a lot of overlap, but the overlap isn't obvious. And then how we turn that into action isn't obvious yet. But all these questions are really, really good to help focus that.
One of the comments I would like to make related to that is what we plan for next year is have focused workshops and sessions within Apereo conferences or any other engagements in follow-up, so that we can designate knowledge in terms of what is some knowledge is what is the projects are going to do.
There's one more question here, and then we'll probably have to wrap up. So
I think maybe.
Please.
Part of the comment, part of the question, it seems to me that there are different involved in order to be successful at their technical community and the executives and the institution, faculty members and students. It's a bit of all over the edge, working together. So to see more conferences and more
Yeah, so like that Open Learning Analytics Summit we did with Solar, we also had folks from EduCause there, from PAR, from the IMS, there's lots of other groups there. And so I totally agree. I think one of the actual groups that got identified that we need to kind of form is a strategy and policy group as well. So we're in the very early days still with this stuff. And I think over the next few years we'll see a lot more trying to help people understand the technology. So I think we should wrap up because I see some more folks coming in here. I'm sure we can hang around and answer more questions and stuff like that back in the room. Thanks a lot for coming out.
Thank you. And if you're interested in continuing the discussion, again, the BOF is 315 somewhere. Down this way, I think. So, thank you, everybody. Trying to start it. Yeah. Right.